Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to cover an important chess strategy concept often used by grandmasters to defend slightly worse positions. The simplification into the middle game or endgame with opposite colored bishops. In chess, when you're under pressure, the best defense is often a strategic trading into a bit worse position that is holdable. The most common defensive simplifications of this type are trades into holdable rook endgame or trades into holdable opposite colored bishops middle game or endgame. With opposite colored bishops, the rules of materials often don't apply. In such situations, being a pawn up or a pawn down might not be significant. What is way more important is the control of key squares and diagonals. In other words, with opposite colored bishops, it's often possible to trade into unbreakable positions, which is a common method of defense. Let's start by taking a look at the position on the board. It's white to move. How would you play here? Please pause the video and think before we go ahead. Okay, this position is not easy. It happened in the sixth game of the 1965 candidates quarterfinal match between Borislav Ivkov and Bernd Larsen. Boris Ivkov is Serbian grandmaster who participated in numerous interzonal tournaments and chess Olympiads representing Yugoslavia in the 1960s and 1970s. Bernd Larsen is a Danish grandmaster who was known for his tricky style of play and who was considered the second best Western player in the world behind only Bobby Fischer in the 1960s and 1970s. At this moment, Black has a strong initiative and White needs to make a difficult choice with the next move. Since the White knight is attacked by g4 pawn, it obviously needs to go somewhere. But where exactly? Ivkov had to calculate well at this moment and, more importantly, to evaluate correctly several possible simplifications, finding a narrow path for defense. So Ivkov played knight g1. This is the best practical choice. The alternatives were significantly worse for White. Let's see what else can happen. Let's say knight goes to d4. And Black will simply trade knights and come with a rook on the second rank. So this endgame with opposite colored bishops is completely lost for White because Black would promote on the queen side after taking b2 and a2 pawn. Let's see what might happen. King protects bishop, one pawn is taken. Okay, now pawn is protected before we take pawn on a2. White is able to take pawn on the other side, but it doesn't matter because Black took two pawns on a2 and b2 and now promoted. Let's say rook takes h6, king g7, and Black pawns are unstoppable. Okay, what else might be played? Knight h4. Here knight is out of play. Black can use it. Let's say play a5, rook b1. Okay, notice that if king takes knight, then there is simple tactics here with simplification, and it would be winning position for Black. Bishop and knight playing against rook, but the problem is that knight is out of play and rook is simply taking pawns on this side. Let's say king 2, take 2, rook takes a2, and Black is winning again because the knight cannot help to stop the pawns. And if at this moment instead of taking knight it would be played rook b1, then bishop a6, and Black wins here due to attack against the queen side pawns later. Rook c2 will come. Okay, what else instead of knight g1? Oh, knight e1 can be played. So this bishop a6 most likely, take, and rook c1. This line was the second best option for White, but it likely leads to a losing position because Black would have a strong initiative. Let's say rook h1 played, b1, bishop a3, and something like this. Defense would be difficult for White here. Okay, but knight g1 was found. Now it's Black's turn. What to do? So Black, Bernd Larsen plays obvious move. looks like black is simply winning. But it appears that this obvious move was a calculation mistake, because black clearly missed the next white's move. Correct, instead of taking on g1, was to play rook c2 immediately. But what was missed after knight takes g1? Rook c1. This move was missed. Intermediate move, taking c file under control and trading in this way. But let's see how black was supposed to play first, and we will proceed with the game. Okay, correct was rook c2. Now, king takes c2 is the only move, because if knight takes, and we take on b2, and this is clearly winning for black. So king takes, so check, d1, trade, and bishop takes f1. This endgame should be eventual win for black. Now let's look a little bit further. Let's say protecting pawn. Black breaks through and passant here, and black king comes. Something like this. King is active. So here fork, and black will win sooner or later. So this was the correct play. But again, at this moment, Larsen simply trades and probably assumes that he's winning. But rook c1, shocking move. Because let's see what would happen if white simply takes on g1. Let's say they take with rook. Then rook comes, pawn is taken on b2, then black takes pawn on a2, and black easily wins here because the queenside connected passed pawns are unstoppable. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, if take with king. Again, rook comes, rook takes b2. Again, seems like black easily winning, but white has a tricky move. They can play e4. Do you see the trick? The trick is here. Discovery attack is threatened. But white still losing after correct rook b1. Now, here trade happens. And this would be opposite color bishop endgame, but black is 2 pawns up and winning. So this is not holdable. But let's see if the tactics is missed. So let's say after e4, rook takes a2. Discovery attack. King takes, and rook is taken. Bishop takes e4. This is, by the way, not easy position. White wins, but the way to win is very narrow. Rook a4 needs to be played. Because if you simply take pawn on a7, then after b3, the pawn is unstoppable. Bishop controls the promotion square and controls b7, nothing white can do. So rook a4, so then king g5, rook takes, and here most likely draw. And notice that if b3 played trying to promote, white is on time to stop the pawns. They take bishop, e5, and control the promotion at this moment. So black pawn cannot move, and white brings king closer and win. But all this didn't happen. So because rook c1 was played by Ivkov, shocking move, Larsen likely missed it, and now trade happens. And knight is trapped. So bishop takes g2. Logical move. Now white needs to decide what to take. Obvious choice to take knight. This was played because if you take in bishop, knight moves to f3, then takes pawn, and black is simply winning 2 pawns up here. So king takes g1 was played, bishop goes back, here some trades of pawns happened. White is a pawn down, but this opposite colored bishop endgame is an obvious draw. It's a fortress. The b2 pawn, e3 pawn, and e5 pawns are on the same color as the white bishop, meaning that black will have nothing to attack once white places its bishop to d4. In other words, white has an unbreakable fortress here. Let's see, game continued a little bit. King comes, king. Now regrouping of the bishop. h4, possible move, not necessary, it was still draw. And bishop comes to d4. Now everything is protected, and both sides start repeating moves, more or less, shuffling pieces back and forth. for a few moves. Here, bishop d4, and the draw was agreed, because black has no weaknesses to attack, and the g4 passed pawn is firmly blocked by the king. White can just repeat moves by shuffling its king or bishop back and forth without any trouble. Let's go to our next example. It's black to move here. This position happened in game 11 of 2018 World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Carlsen plays white, Caruana plays black. In this game, Caruana played the opening, which was a Petrov's defense, pretty well with black and got a solid position. Nevertheless, Carlsen still had some pressure at this moment due to the bishop pair, hoping to eventually exploit this minimal advantage. In other words, even if the position is close to equality, black should be careful here. And Caruana played great move, knight e5. With a strong move, Caruana forces a simplification to opposite color bishop endgame, which is slightly worse, but defendable for black. Alternatives were worse for black. Let's see what else might happen. Instead of knight e5, knight takes h2, bad idea. So here, knight simply trapped f3, we're controlling g4 square and coming and eating this poor knight. Okay, what else may be played? Rook a e8. Possible move, but then white regroups, attacks pawn. And this would be a kind of position Carlsen would love to get, with a small long-term advantage due to the bishop pair. Carlsen is famous for exploiting such small advantages, even against top opposition. Okay, what else instead of knight e5? Let's say rook d8. Okay, bishop c3, knight f6, b3, and again the same long-term small advantage due to the bishop pair. Okay, but knight e5 was played. Okay, Carlsen played bishop f4, allowing the trade. What else? So white can try to play here bishop c3. The idea is that if black trades immediately on d3, then we get some complicated endgame. Let's say take, then we take. Now pawn attacked on d6, protected, rook g3, pawn attacked on g7, g6, and white has this rook takes e6 move. Now taking pawn on g6, taking pawn on e6, and we have quite complicated position that engines consider equal. But it's not easy to play the sharp endgame for both sides. But if Carlsen decided to play at this moment bishop c3, and black is not required to trade immediately, they might, for example, play f6. Now if white trades, let's see what happens. White tries to get control of d file, but black can regroup here. So let's say king comes, both rooks are there, but now rook c7, followed by king e7, followed by rook d7, trades and most likely draw. But this didn't happen, so Carlsen did play bishop f4. Okay, now trade happens, rook takes, and pawn on d6 is attacked. Also, we have pin on e-file, but rook d7, and here white wins a pawn. So rook d8, great move. Due to the threats of back rank, so white needs to play rook d2. So take, king c1, b6, and bishop f4. Notice that white wins a pawn, because black pawns are sitting on dark squares, and even if trade of rooks happening, one of the pawns would be lost. So rook traded, king takes d2, and black played a6. Again, taking side pawn, this time with bishop, not with knight, would be bad idea. Bishop will get trapped. Let's see what happens. Bishop takes a2, b3, locking the bishop. Black tries to rescue the bishop, but king comes. And then king b2. The problem is that white bishop controls c1 square, so simply bishop taken, then pawn would be taken, and white should easily win this endgame. But of course this didn't happen. a6 was played, so a3, and white wins a pawn. Play bishop c7 attacking. Now fork, pawn attacked, king attacked, and white is up a pawn. But black still should be able to hold a draw here. This endgame is not a dead draw yet, and white might try to create some practical problems. So Carlsen plays it. It looks like draw, but the game continues. So h5 was played by Caruana. It's a typical defensive idea in such endgames to place the pawns on the squares of the same color as the bishop. So you see pawn goes to h5, and this pawn goes to g6, nothing to attack. So king comes, king d7, king d4, g6. You see, black bishop controlling, everything is protected. Still, it's not a dead draw. Looks like nothing can be done, but let's see how Carlsen plays it. Bishop e2. Looks like we're just moving back and forth here. Not much happening. Now white creates passed pawn, but this pawn is blocked. King sits in front of the pawn. Again, looks like complete draw. What can be even done? Pawns are sitting on light squares. Bishop on e6. King stops this pawn. What can you do? But let's see how it was played. So Carlsen plays c5 and now improves king. So gets king closer to the pawns. Again, several. And g4. Now trying to create some potential chances with a breakthrough on king side. Okay, take. King takes. Still pawn on f7 is protected. Looks like nothing can be done. And let's see what happens further. Just repeating some moves here. A bit improving position. And suddenly f5. Pure magic by Carlsen. It appeared to be a dead draw, but now somehow black must find the only move that saves the game. Looks strange, but black has only one move at this moment, and Caruana found it. Played bishop b1. That's correct move. Let's see what else might happen. Okay, if pawn takes, then this pawn is winning. Let's see. King takes. Then we bring king closer, pushing the pawn, and winning bishop. So coming, and this endgame is a win. Okay, what else? King d5. Then we just take on g6. Take, and it would be the same. White pawn will move, king will come, white will win bishop and win the remaining endgame. So after f5, bishop b1 is the only move. So it was played. Now bishop f2 was played in the game, but let's see what if Carlsen takes. Again, black should be very careful here. They need to take on f5 with bishop, because if they take with pawn, then again king comes. Let's say something like this happens, and h5, it would be the same story. This pawn will not help. White will push, king will come, h7, win bishop, then come win this pawn and win the remaining endgame. Okay, so let's say after bishop takes f5, king f6. Again, black should be careful, not assume it's that draw, because if they play king d5, h5, another breakthrough. So white somehow created all these breakthrough chances, but in the game it was played bishop f2, bishop c2, and the draw was finally agreed. Let's go to our next example. It's black to play. This position happened in game 15 of the 1981 World Championship match between Anatoly Karpov and Viktor Korchnoi. In this game, Korchnoi, who played white, got advantage in English opening. At the moment, white is a bit better due to the bishop pair and the possibility of moving its pawn chain forward in several different ways. d4 maybe at some moment, f4 at some moment, so white has chances here. So Karpov realized that he was under long-term pressure in slightly worse but unpleasant position and decided to sacrifice a pawn, simplifying to holdable opposite color bishop middle game. Okay, let's see what happened. Karpov played d5. This move sacrifices a pawn. We'll see why a bit later. But let's first examine what black can do instead of playing d5. Let's say black improves rook. So white improves position, black. queen improves. Now white takes space on queen side, and it would be one of many possible lines where white has a small but lasting advantage. Okay, let's see what else. Maybe bishop b6 immediately, because d4 was potentially played. Let's say queen f3, queen regrouped to d5, and now pawn is coming to f4. White has initiative here. So d5 was played. This is sacrifice of the pawn. So white not required to accept it, but bishop takes e5 is the most principled move. So after knight takes e5, d4, we have central fork. And white also wins the d5 pawn in a few moves because black is not able to protect it. That's why it was not just a trade with central fork, but a sacrifice of a pawn. So bishop d6 was played, take, and now pawn on d5 is pretty weak, rook c1, and difficult to protect the pawn. d4, another strong move. So black could give away pawn differently. Let's say play rook fd8, white still comes, wins pawn, and here white is up a pawn and keep pawn chain in the original way. So this would be maybe holdable position for black, maybe not. So Karpov played better. He played d4. Now after rook c5, followed by rook d5, white wins pawn, but the key difference is that we need to take on d4 with pawn, breaking the pawn chain. So white takes and rook a d8. Now the position is very close to equal. White is up a pawn, but this pawn can be blocked on the d6 square. And there are no other weaknesses in black position that white can attack and no other imbalances to exploit. Each side controls its own color complex and the position is unbreakable. Okay, let's see what happened. Queen c1 was played, 6, trade, d5. Pawn is protected, extra pawn on d5, protected passed pawn, but the problem is that no progress because black is controlling d6 square. e6. So not clear how white can make any further progress. So bishop f3 was played, g7, 1, d7. Now rook is coming to either c7 or e7. Queen f4, rook e7, offering trade of rooks. Without rooks, white cannot make progress because the d6 square is under black's control and there is no play anywhere else. With rooks, it's still a fortress. So white decided to trade rooks. Okay, but let's see if white plays with the rooks. Let's say rook c1, bishop e5, let's say queen moves, bishop d6, and rook c7. What to do? Not clear. Looks like holdable position. What else? Let's say rook d1, about the same. 2, let's say queen d6, rook c7, and how to make progress with this extra pawn. So Krasnoi traded rooks here and played king g2. Now for threatening h5. So black played h5. It makes no sense to let white to play h5. It might create attacking chances against black's king. So let's say bishop e2 was played, 5, c4, queen f6, and queen d2. So if queens are traded, white can make no progress, but with the queens on the board, it's about the same situation because d6 is controlled and no other weaknesses. So queen d2 was played, b6, 4, and we're just moving back and forth here, more or less. f6, queen d2, queen e5. Black simply stays on the central squares and controls d6. The draw is unavoidable. A couple more moves were played. So here check, queen e5, again controlling squares, bishop d1, queen e4, and the draw was finally agreed. We're done with our examples of the simplifications into slightly worse but holdable middle games and endgames with opposite colored bishops. Today, the key takeaway is that worse positions with opposite colored bishops are often holdable. Another takeaway is that the rules of material often don't apply with opposite colored bishops. In such situations, it's very possible to be down 1 or even 2 pawns, but still be able to hold a solid draw due to the control over the key squares and diagonals. Now it's your turn. Try to apply these strategic principles in your own games. Please let me know in the comments how it goes. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more chess tips and lessons. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.